3 resignations over the PM's Rwanda bill. Is this a moment of jeopardy for Rishi Sunak? Tonight, the Prime Minister has lost 2 deputy chairmen and 1 ministerial aide, plus 58 of his own MPs voted against him. Has Mr Sunak lost his grip on his party? I've been talking to one MP on the right of the party who defied the 3-line whip today.
If we don't succeed in making this bill work and providing an effective deterrent that stops people setting off across the English Channel illegally, then we will not be able to win the election.
So how much trouble is the PM's flagship policy in, if any? We'll discuss with 2 people in the know. Also tonight, Donald Trump was a runaway winner of the Iowa caucus. Is he invincible?
What Donald Trump has achieved here is remarkable. He is a phenomenon, especially when you consider that his attempt to overturn an election and unprecedented legal troubles don't seem to have dented the devotion of his supporters.
And a mea culpa from Fujitsu.
We did have bugs and errors in the system, and we did help the Post Office in their prosecutions of the sub-postmasters. For that, we are truly sorry.
Is that apology accepted by this postmaster? He was sectioned 3 times after having to find £108,000 to pay back the Post Office. And we'll talk to this Labour MP calling for the government to pause Fujitsu's contracts with multiple government departments. And should they, can they be blocked from government contracts in the future? Good evening. The divisions in the Conservative Party were in full view today in the Commons ahead of a crunch vote tomorrow night on the Prime Minister's flagship Safety of Rwanda bill. Nick is here. So what, from your intel, might happen tomorrow?
Well, Vic, all eyes on that final vote tomorrow in the House of Commons before the bill goes to the House of Lords, and there is absolute confidence in government circles that they will win that vote. And my sources are pointing to 2 key elements. So before we get to that final vote, there will be more rebel amendments, and crucially one tabled by the former Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick. If that was passed, that would give ministers greater powers to ignore the so-called Rule 39 measures of the European Convention on Human Rights, and those are injunctions that have grounded flights. Now, Rishi Sunak said earlier this week that he was prepared to ignore foreign courts. And I understand that the plan tomorrow is that Michael Tomlinson, who is the illegal migration minister, he will, as I'm told, lean very heavily in the direction of the rebels on this. And there is a suggestion that he will make a commitment from the dispatch box to amend the Civil Service Code to say that there will be a presumption that Rule 39 injunctions would be ignored. So not amending the bill, but giving a big and a specific commitment. The second element that gives the government confidence of success are the tactics of the 3 people who resigned from government or party jobs today after they joined the rebellion. Now, those 3 who, according to government sources, were actually sacked are Jane Stevenson, no longer a ministerial aide, and Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith, no longer Tory deputy chairman. And I'm told that all 3 of them have made clear to the government that they will vote with Rishi Sunak on that final vote in the Commons tomorrow night. Now, just to get an idea...
So what was the point of them resigning then?
Well, because they were unable to abide by a government 3-line whip, which was to say that you cannot vote for these rebel amendments. That is defying a whip, and if you do that, the usual convention is that you lose a government or a party.
But they're going to vote for the bill tomorrow night?
Vote for the bill tomorrow night, because that
unamended, probably.
Well, and also remember these votes today, the Labour Party was voting with the government, so these rebels knew that they wouldn't get through. Tomorrow night, the Labour Party will be voting against the government. But anyway, to get an idea of their approach, what we can do is look at the joint letter that was signed by Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith. And if we look at one bit that I'm highlighting, there it is. He says, in the past, we've signed amendments, voted for 10-minute rule bills to argue for safeguards, and important in terms of our credibility that we are consistent with this. But then let's look at the final bit of their letter. It says, we commend your work on illegal migration so far. And then look at this. We both look forward to making this legislation work. That is not the language you would use if you're going to kill the bill.
Right, OK. I still think I'm a bit confused about why they've done what they've done, but I hear what you said. Right, 58 MPs did vote against the government.
Well, it's actually 60 because there were two tellers. No, 58 against, two tellers, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Miriam Case. So that's 60. That is a big rebellion. It included Liz Truss. I was at the meeting they had this evening at 5 o'clock to talk about it. There was Suella Braverman, former Home Secretary. There was Simon Clarke, former Senior Cabinet Minister. And what this tells the world is that this is a divided party. And what all this focus does is it raises the salience of an issue that at the moment is persuading people who might be natural Tory voters to vote for the Reform Party on the grounds that government hasn't been delivering. What Rishi Sunak would say is this is absolutely delivering. This is absolutely going to provide a deterrent to people not to get into the small boats.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you. Well, earlier this evening I went down to the Commons as voting was underway and spoke to one of those Tories who defied the three-line whip and voted for the amendments to toughen up this legislation. It was just after Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith had resigned. Danny Krueger is co-chair of the group calling itself the New Conservatives, on the right of the party. And I asked him for his reaction to the resignation of the two former deputy chairmen.
Well, I pay tribute to Brendan and Lee. They've given up good jobs and they were doing really good work for the party. And it's a sad day when the party has to part company with them in this way. I hope they'll be back because we all want the same thing, which is a policy that succeeds in stopping illegal migration. And Lee and Brendan, I think, have made an important stand today, as have all of us who've broken the party whip. None of us enjoy doing that, but really this matters so much that we get this policy right. We support what the government's trying to do. We think they need to tighten the policy further.
I want to put to you that the voting for the amendments today against the party whip, plus the two resignations of deputy chairmen, I mean, that is just a blatant act of disloyalty to your Prime Minister, isn't it?
Well, I mean, breaking the whip is a hard thing to do, but we are here as MPs.
So disloyalty?
Well, listen, we're here as MPs. We're here to represent our constituents and to do what we think is right in the national interest. Usually that involves following your party whip. Politics depends on parties. But we're not here simply to vote for whatever the government tells us to. Parliament has a process of committee looking at the way bills are framed, line by line. Amendments can be tabled, that's what's happened today, and if MPs feel strongly enough about it, they will vote against their party line. That happens all the time, and it's a very healthy part of our democracy. Imagine what would happen if we didn't have that.
Are you going all out to win the next general election?
Absolutely, and we think
because
the way
you know that divided parties don't win elections.
Nor do parties that are in the wrong place, and the public want us to be in the right place on migration. We are nearly there. We're certainly in a better place than Labour are on it. But the fact is, if we don't succeed in making this bill work and providing an effective deterrent that stops people setting off across the English Channel illegally, then we will not be able to win the election. The public expect us to succeed here. Our mission and our imperative and our absolute moral obligation is to make sure that this bill works. We're very late in the day. We've tried twice with previous bills. They haven't worked. This one has to.
It sounds like you're saying if you can get a couple of Boeing 747s off before the next general election to Rwanda, you're going to win a fifth term. Do you genuinely believe?
Well, I think we need to do a whole lot of things to convince the public to re-elect us. But one of the absolute top priorities is to successfully stop the scourge of illegal migration that we have coming across the Channel, and then the demand stops.
Can I ask you why the extra 150 or so judges that Rishi Sunak is promising and freeing up of courtrooms that Rishi Sunak is apparently promising to make sure any appeals are dealt with swiftly is not enough for you?
Well, I'm encouraged by that. I mean, I'm slightly concerned that it suggests that the government itself expects there to be a large number of legal claims. But it is good that these resources are being made available. The government's already done a lot.
Let me just, on that point, what do you say to victims of crime, rape victims, for example, who've been waiting 4 years for their case to come to court, and they see suddenly Rishi Sunak can click his fingers and find 150 judges and free up courtrooms?
I'm afraid that criticism is a fair one. I'm also concerned about the implications for our legal system if it is possible. And of course, I don't think it will be possible to get all these judges recruited, trained, put into post very quickly. So I don't think on its own that's sufficient. But we do need a lot of capacity. We need capacity in the detention system as well as in the legal system. But I think the simplest way to ensure that we don't clog up our courts and our detention centres is to ensure that people who arrive here are immediately detained and removed. And if they want to pursue their legal rights after that, they can do so and potentially end up coming back to the UK. But they've got to have their claims dealt with once they've left and been deported.
If it's unamended tomorrow night, you're likely to vote against?
Let's see, I'm prepared to do so.
OK, and so we come to the question of what does the public think? Are you actually going to go back to your constituents and say, I voted against the Rwanda legislation?
I don't want to get to that point. I want to vote for the Rwanda legislation. I want us to have a policy that works.
But if it's unamended, you're likely to vote against it.
I'm not going to get drawn on what I'll do tomorrow because, as I say, in conscience we're trying to deal fairly with the government. We're having conversations with them. We've still got time. There's lots more debate tomorrow. Amendments will be laid, voted on. Some might be accepted, some might be passed. Let's see what the bill looks like when we have to vote on it tomorrow evening.
And we may speak tomorrow night. Thank you very much for talking to Newsnight. Thank you. Well, one problem for the Prime Minister is that if he toughens up the legislation to appease people like Danny Krueger, who you just heard from, the so-called One Nation Conservatives on the left of the Tory party say they wouldn't be able to back the bill. Earlier, I asked the chair of that group, Damien Green, whether today's resignations could destabilise the Prime Minister and damage his authority.
I don't think it does. I think.
Really?
Yeah. I think if people are free to exercise their conscience, but it's important that you have to support the Prime Minister if you want a job either in government or at the top end of the party, and they have appropriately resigned.
I want to ask you about Robert Buckland's amendment, which may come before you all tomorrow. It softens the legislation. He is on your wing of the party. What's he playing at?
Oh, well, Robert has put down amendments that allow us to have a discussion about the concerns that people on the moderate, the centre-left of the Conservative Party have, and Robert made a very good speech today. But the One Nation group is not seeking in any way to destabilise the legislation. We voted with the government solidly today, and I anticipate we will vote with the government solidly tomorrow.
Well, let's gauge the impact of today's resignations with Henry Hill, who is Deputy Editor of the website Conservative Home, and Noah Hoffman, Political Correspondent at The Sun. Welcome, both of you. Thanks for being with us. How damaging is this for Rishi Sunak, if at all?
Well, he's seeing off the rebellion, and I think at this point that's what he can ask for. He looks like he's got the votes to see off all of the amendments. The amendments, as you were just hearing, would have opened up a world of difficulty for the government in terms of the other wing of the party. And then the question simply becomes, can he get it through third reading? And I suspect he can.
What are you hearing, Noah, from Conservative MPs that you're in touch with?
So morale across the board among Conservative MPs is very low, and tonight was yet another example of endless sort of Tory drama that led to a lot of feelings of apathy and really a lot of MPs being fed up. But equally, what's unifying Tory MPs right now is this sort of desperate desire to stop the boats, because really a lot of Tory MPs believe the issue of illegal migration is the main subject that separates the Tories from Labour. They believe Labour doesn't have a viable alternative. They believe that the Rwanda plan is the only deterrent that will work, that they believe will stop illegal crossings, and therefore at the end of the day they do need to band together so that they have some ammunition when it comes to an election.
Henry Hill, could there be any link between the actions of Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith, Red Wall Conservative MPs, and the MRP poll in the Telegraph yesterday, which has really spooked some backbenchers, particularly Red Wallers?
Well, there could be, for sure. I couldn't speculate as to their individual motivations, but yeah, there is clearly that. The timing of that poll, I don't think, was a coincidence that it's coming directly before this. It's been followed up by a raft of specific polling about the immigration and Rwanda policy in various seats. So there is clearly a concerted push to try and sort of get the Prime Minister to move in a certain direction. And, you know, he is in a difficult place because this is one of the few things where there's clear blue water between Labour and the Tories. It's one thing that he can attack Labour on and say, you don't have an answer to this. But ultimately, he's failed twice. He's failed twice on this policy. He's tried to thread the needle of getting an effective Rwanda policy that won't challenge the courts or our legal system. And the rebels are saying, well, you've failed with this twice. Why should we expect this particular bit of clever drafting to work now? And that's not something to which the government necessarily has a good answer, although it's going to win, I think, in the House of Commons.
There isn't particularly a good answer, as Henry says, because he may get it through, and there may be, if it's not amended, if it's not toughened, as some in the party want, then the courts may well be clogged up with appeals, despite him bringing in another 150 judges and freeing up court time and all the rest of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that case, we could see the Prime Minister perhaps even trigger an election that could be based around the question of leaving the ECHR and leaving European courts. So, yes, as Henry said, I do think this will pass tomorrow. But even if it does, it still needs to get through the Lords. It still needs to get through the UK courts as well. And we can expect many organisations to challenge that as well. So this is only the very beginning, but to just pass that difficult hurdle of getting this emergency bill through will be a small win amid, you know, a whole load of losses that the PM has suffered recently.
Do you think this legislation is actually going to get planes off the ground and deter people from coming across in boats?
Well, it's very hard to judge because, as you say, it depends a lot on how the courts handle it, right? You can design something in principle, and the government has, in theory, hugely restricted the ability to file individual appeals, which is what clogs up the system. But we won't know until it gets in front of the House of Lords. I think, not the House of Lords anymore, but the Supreme Court. But I think that the problem is that even if the Rwanda scheme worked perfectly, it can only be a trial balloon for a broader system, right? The numbers of people that Rwanda is signed up to taking is not enough to provide a deterrent. So it could prove the concept, and you could then maybe negotiate other deals. But no, in and of itself, the legislation could get some planes off the ground. I wouldn't bet on it, but it could. But that is not going to provide a deterrent. It can only show that this model works if you scale it up.
Right. In terms of, when you look at polling, the priorities of British voters, number one is the economy. Number one is, you know, the money in your back pocket. Number two is the NHS. Number three is migration. Do you think the Conservative Party's spending too much time on this issue? Or have they got to get this through because a year ago Rishi Sunak said, stop the boats, we're going to stop the boats?
So you're completely right on the issue of the cost of living crisis absolutely being at the forefront of everyone's minds, particularly Sun readers as well are really feeling the pinch. However, immigration is incredibly important to the readers as well and to members of the public. As you said, the polling does show that. And the Sun believes that the PM is right to focus on this issue because it is something that affects our readers. It is something that is going to be at the forefront of a general election campaign. And again, as we've said, it's clear blue water between the Tories and Labour. In terms of the economy, they are in many respects in lockstep in both parties wanting to sort of reduce taxes, boost growth, all of these sort of obvious promises. But there is this big dividing line on illegal migration. And so from a sort of party political perspective and a strategic perspective, it is right that a lot of time is being spent on the issue.
Thank you both very much. Thank you. Henry Hill from Conservative Home, Noah Hoffman from The Sun. Thank you. What does it tell us that Donald Trump has won so much support so early in the race to become the Republicans' presidential candidate? Iowa has just given Mr. Trump the biggest caucus win in history. Joe is there. What is the mood like in the state today, Joe?
Well, it depends on who you ask, Victoria. 3 million people live in Iowa, and yet just over 110,000 Republicans took part last night, less than 15% of the total registered. Maybe this cold weather, -16 at the moment, affecting turnout. The total political advertising spending just in this state was north of $120 million. That works out as about $1,000 per vote. As for the victor last night, differing views on the secrets of his success, but in the interpretation of former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, Trump is not a candidate, but the leader of a national movement.
By the time morning had broken, so had the dreams of some presidential candidates. 2 quit the race, leaving a final 3, but the winner's margin of victory, a record 30-point lead, suggests it may be Trump's time once again. Yet at the Drake Diner in Des Moines, the former president's rhetoric wasn't to everyone's taste. And what's wrong with him?
Oh, don't even get me started. I don't like the man. I mean, I don't think he's a good person.
and will not vote for Trump, no matter what. So that's...
Why not?
I don't like his policies. I don't like him personally. I don't think he's honest.
To the frustration of his critics, Mr. Trump secured 51% of the vote, winning in towns, in suburbs, in rural areas, and, according to caucus polling, across key Republican demographics, from white evangelical Christians to college graduates. What Donald Trump has achieved here is remarkable. He is a phenomenon, especially when you consider that his attempt to overturn an election and unprecedented legal troubles don't seem to have dented the devotion of his supporters. Last night, in the shadow of Iowa's state capitol, Republicans braved dangerously low temperatures to gather and caucus in a history museum. Among them, 30-year-old Dr. Gabe Conley, here to speak on behalf of his chosen candidate, biotech entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy.
I'm a little bit nervous, but it feels right because I think Vivek has earned my support over the course of the last year.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just 10 turned up for this precinct. Some felt compelled to attend for the first time.
I've lived in Iowa my entire life. I've never caucused, so this is new to me. But yeah,
so why have you turned up this time?
Because I think the whole world's right now at a really dangerous place.
And you think Donald Trump's the answer?
I know Donald Trump can fix it.
Others had their minds changed. Gabe has swung your vote from Nikki Haley to Vivek Ramaswamy.
Just the fact that he had someone speaking that was from the state of Iowa, that made a big difference for me.
Although within hours his candidate had dropped out and endorsed Donald Trump. Whilst he may be back on winning form,
we want to thank the great people of Iowa. Thank you. We love you all. What a turnout, what a crowd.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis came in a distant second place, with 21% of the vote in a state he really needed to win.
As the next president of the United States, I am going to get the job done for this country.
Nikki Haley managed third and has turned her attention to the next vote in New Hampshire in 7 days' time.
Trump and Biden both put our country trillions of dollars deeper in debt, and our kids will never forgive them for it.
Veteran pollster Frank Luntz has been covering these caucuses for 28 years.
I've never seen intensity like what I saw yesterday. The Trump people came only to vote for Donald Trump. They're not listening to anyone. They don't care about any other candidate. The Haley voters, the DeSantis voters, even the Vivek Ramaswamy voters, they're considering voting for somebody else, not the Trump voters. And that intensity is going to help him in the general election, but it's not enough. In the end, if you just win Republicans, you don't win the presidency.
Is it over for Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis?
It's not over for Nikki Haley because there's a significant segment among conservative independents that think she's great. For Ron DeSantis, his money was spent in Iowa, his time was spent in Iowa, his effort was spent in Iowa. He doesn't have an organization in New Hampshire. He doesn't have support in New Hampshire. She can go on. He can't.
Across town at the Des Moines Curling Club, there's no talking politics during play. Although off the ice, one member admitted to tactically changing team from Democrat to Republican. So you switched?
I did. I changed my affiliation. And so that I have now the opportunity to vote for Nikki Haley and, more importantly, not Donald Trump.
And the one thing they seem to unite on here is a weariness about the campaign ahead.
It's messy right now. It's divisive. I don't feel like you can talk to anyone about what issues are important to you without someone getting up in arms.
Iowa has already swept aside 2 Republican campaigns. And with the next battle approaching in New Hampshire, it may not be long before we see another candidate knocked out.
Joe Pike. Former sub-postmaster Joe Hamilton was right behind one of Fujitsu's Europe bosses today as he sat before MPs and said he was truly sorry for the role his company played in helping the Post Office wrongly prosecute former branch managers. Truly sorry. Joe Hamilton was wrongly convicted of stealing £36,000. Clearly, when people have had their lives trashed, their businesses trashed, their finances trashed, and in some cases, people were jailed when they hadn't actually stolen anything because it was actually down to deficiencies in Fujitsu's Horizon IT system, truly sorry may not be enough. We'll ask a former sub-postmaster who was with us last week and is back with us tonight to tell you what he thinks in just a moment. First, here's Seema with a recap of today's evidence before both the Business Select Committee and also the Post Office Public Inquiry.
Yes, I mean, it was quite the day, wasn't it, for Fujitsu today. After days of constant coverage of the Post Office scandal, we actually heard from two bosses today. The global chief executive in Davos, who said that he was sorry for the scandal, and the Europe's chief executive, Paul Patterson, who was in front of the Business Select Committee, and he was candid. He said he was sorry for the part that Fujitsu played in the scandal and the pain it's caused, and he also admitted that the company provided evidence in the prosecution to the Post Office to prosecute hundreds of innocent sub-postmasters.
I am personally appalled by the evidence that I have seen and what I have saw on the television drama and the statements I've seen from the victims to the inquiry. So we did not stand up to that in those periods of time.
He also said, I think there is a moral obligation for the company to contribute to the compensation for those wrongly accused. And he said Fujitsu was aware there were bugs, errors and defects in the Horizon IT system from early on after its rollout in 1999. He also made clear that the company told the Post Office that its accounts could be altered remotely. That's something the Post Office denied for years. I think a moment today that will have angered many of those who were wrongly convicted was when Mr. Patterson was asked why Fujitsu didn't do anything about the glitches in the Horizon IT system, even when the company knew that they existed. His response to that was, I don't know. I really don't know. He said, on a personal level, I wish I did know. Following my appointment in 2019, I have looked back on those situations for the company and the evidence I have seen, and I just don't know. Those words will provide little comfort to those who've been spending years fighting for justice.
Thank you, Seema. Well, back with us is Balinder Gil, a postmaster wrongly suspended and left bankrupt, trying to repay £108,000 back to the Post Office. He was sectioned 3 times in the years that followed. And you told our audience last week all about your traumatic experience. Thank you for being back with us.
Thank you.
We're going to play you some of the clips from the evidence today, starting with Paul Patterson saying sorry.
Sure. Fujitsu would like to apologise for our part in this appalling miscarriage of justice. We were involved from the very start. We did have bugs and errors in the system, and we did help the Post Office in their prosecutions of the sub-postmasters. For that, we are truly sorry.
Is that an apology you accept, Bal?
It's very painful. It takes me back to 20 years ago of when it happened, but I think it seems on the face of it sincere to some degree. Someone's trying to take ownership, or it feels that someone from the very top, which I've learnt later in the day that somebody from the very top has also apologised. The fact that they focused on the sub-postmaster as the sort of primary part of the apology, give it a little bit more weight, but I'm very, find it very hard to trust until this is resolved. So.
Sure. He also admitted that Fujitsu did have access to the Horizon systems, even though it had previously been denied on multiple occasions. Have a listen.
That there was remote access to these systems. What took place or did not take place in those interventions is certainly, I know, one of the streams of work that the inquiry are looking at as well. But there was remote access.
I mean, you already knew that because because you and all the other sub-postmasters who you'd got together with knew.
Yes.
But to hear the Fujitsu boss say it, what does that mean?
Very, very disturbing, but a little bit of a relief as well, that what we thought was true is actually true. I've drove past their building many times, and I've always wondered what happened there and whether we'd ever know. So to hear them say it, at least it's a point of truth, which doesn't need to be disputed. So
yeah, it's a start, isn't it?
Yes,
I suppose. We also heard from the current Post Office Chief Executive, a guy called Nick Reed. He was pressed by the chair of the Business Select Committee, Labour MP Liam Byrne, on when the Post Office knew that Horizon could be accessed remotely.
Surely you must be telling Sir Wynn's inquiry when somebody in the Post Office knew that remote access to terminals was possible.
We will be providing Sir Wynn with all the information that he requires.
But what's the answer?
I haven't got that specific date. I can come back to you with what we have supplied in the same way as Mr. Patterson has described, that we will come back to you. I can do the same.
I think we are both surprised and disappointed that you've not got that question answered on the table.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Absolutely feel the same way, that it's very disappointing, as the Select Committee was saying, that why are these things still being batted away? Why can they not give straight answers? You know, it doesn't feel, there's always that resistance and some sort of protecting each other and not letting us get to the truth. Like, when are they actually going to just put their hands up and say, look, okay, you know, this is what happened, let's deal with it. And I think I find a little bit, they pass the book back to the inquiry a lot, that leave it to the inquiry, it will get, and so I want to see some ownership there, you know, or someone to stand up and say, you know, I've got this, and you know, I'm going to look after these people. There was a lot of empty words, and yeah, I felt it was quite abstruse, you know, like, it didn't flow. Yeah, obstructive. Yeah. It didn't flow, you know, it didn't flow for me. I didn't feel, there wasn't no real feeling there that something's actually happening. It's just the same old Post Office, same thing.
I've just met your mum outside because you've brought her tonight, and it was lovely to meet Kashmir.
Thank you.
Tell our audience what happened to your mum after what happened to you, which was you were made bankrupt, you were told you owed the Post Office a load of money, you ended up being sectioned 3 times. So your mum took over your Post Office.
Yeah, so, excuse me. So what happened was, because my parents were told I'd done some sort of fraud, that I was a criminal, they were then duped into taking the post offices back over. They took them over a period like after I'd been there, and there'd been some interim people. They were told that because I'd done something, that the business was sound. I mean, Dad, who took the business over officially as a postmaster, it was done over a handshake. There was no business plan or forecast like I'd done or anything else. Mum was the kind of main manager of the same store where my issues occurred, at the same post office. She ran that post office sort of full-heartedly and gave it everything she got. In 2009, they came and they said that she had a shortage of £57,000.
What?
Yeah, so it was there.
57,000?
57,000, yeah, after what happened to me as well, you know. So they basically, they searched my parents' home, they interrogated my mum, they got a confession out of her to say that the money might have gone in a bag, or she doesn't really know, and that she'd changed the accounts. She's not the same person. She never will be.
And she was convicted?
Yeah, she was convicted. So I remember we reconciled over this, because her experience, that there was a lot of pride in the family. I mean, my dad kicked me out because he thought I'd dishonoured the family name, but at that time there was like a new feeling of that somehow the family, there was some reconciliation. And I remember taking my mum to court, and literally it was an icy road, and there was a local photographer taking a picture, and she kind of was slipped on the ice and just grabbing her arm, and she said, am I actually going to go home after this? And we just like pushing her in, not knowing ourselves.
Because she thought she might be going to jail.
Yeah, yeah. It was a deal, literally, it was a deal at the very last minute, when the same thing we know they do to a lot of people now, is they drop the theft charge, let her take the false accounting, because they'd repaid the money, which was property was something which was meant to be their retirement, a property they'd purchased and were renting out, and yeah, it was gone, just wiped away to cover that. Plus they had to borrow money then to try and stay afloat, and yeah, very, very, she's mentally not the same person. I don't think I'll ever get Mum back. I don't think we'll get her back in the full way that we know her, or my dad to some degree.
And it just shows how this what happened to you had this ripple effect through your whole family.
Yes, yes. So
I am so sorry for your family.
Don't be. Thank you for
honestly
always listening to
thank
me.
You, thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
No, no, and thank you for sharing. And it's lovely to meet her. We're going to talk more in just a moment. Sure. There have been calls for a moratorium on new public sector contracts being granted to Fujitsu. Some have gone further and suggested the firm should be stripped of existing contracts because of its role in the post office scandal, one of the most widespread miscarriages of justice in British legal history. But how feasible is that? Here's Ben.
Just how embedded is Fujitsu in the UK public sector? The answer is extremely. The company received £427 million of public sector revenue in 2022-23. It does work across the Home Office, HMRC, the Foreign Office, DEFRA, the MOD and the Post Office, of course, still running the Horizon system. It's officially designated as a strategic supplier to the state, which means the goods and services it provides are considered so important that the relationship is coordinated through the Cabinet Office. The proposal of a moratorium is relevant because new contracts or rolled over contracts are coming in all the time. A new Environment Agency contract with Fujitsu for managing its flood warning system was awarded only this month. Yet the question of a moratorium on new contracts and, of course, cancelling existing ones raised the question of what the impact would be on the public sector to provide the services. Is it realistic to expect that another private sector provider could step in? Let's take the case of the Police National Computer, which Fujitsu has run for decades. There were no other private sector bidders except Fujitsu when the contract came up for renewal in 2022. This highlights the technical difficulty of moving away from a specific IT provider, even if its performance is unsatisfactory.
It's just not practical to strip Fujitsu of its contracts. It's too well entrenched within big departments such as HMRC and the Department for Work and Pensions. Those departments would cease to function properly without Fujitsu.
And, by the way, it seems that Fujitsu's performance might have been deficient in the case of the Police National Computer. In 2021, the system mistakenly deleted the records of around 113,000 individuals due to a defective coding problem, according to the then Minister for Crime and Policing, which will sound familiar to anyone who's followed the Post Office Horizon case. Fujitsu was also part of a consortium tasked with digitising the NHS's records in 2004. But the NHS terminated its contract with Fujitsu in 2008 after repeated delays and failure to deliver. However, Fujitsu sued the government for £700 million and finally won the case in 2014, which is estimated to have cost the taxpayer hundreds of millions of pounds in legal fees and costs. So there are legal as well as technical barriers to getting rid of underperforming IT contractors. This points to something bigger than a problem with one company. How do we design an IT public procurement system in which no contractor is too dominant and powerful not to use or to get rid of if it's merited?
Well, Bal is still with us, as is Labour MP Kate Osborne. She asked then Prime Minister Boris Johnson in early 2020, actually, to launch an independent review into the Post Office and Horizon scandal. Then she handed a petition to Number 10 asking for a full public inquiry to clear people's names. The MP spent 25 years working at Royal Mail before becoming an MP. What do you want the government to do with the Fujitsu contracts?
So thank you for inviting me onto the programme, Victoria. So in October last year, I asked the then Minister if they would pause, at the very least, pause giving new contracts to Fujitsu, because it had already become very clear that they had played a big part in the Horizon scandal. I then asked the Minister again last week the same question: will they pause the contracts? I think that's the least that they need to be doing.
So not strip them of the current contracts, because they're across multiple departments.
Yeah, I would like to see them pull. I would like to see them strip the contracts away. I think any due diligence will show, as your report has just shown, that this company can't be trusted. Let's not let's not forget the damage that they've done to people like Bal and so many other postmasters here. It's taken near on 15 years for them to apologise. And what we need is to see people held to account within the post office, but also within Fujitsu. And if necessary, we need to see people go to prison in the same way that they sent postmasters and postmistresses to prison.
I just wonder how feasible or realistic it will be to remove the company from the public sector. I mean, Ben gave the example of the Police National Computer. Fujitsu's run it for many years. There were no other private sector bidders except Fujitsu when the contract came up for renewal in 2022.
Yeah, and you have to wonder, certainly I wonder, when you've got somebody very senior in Fujitsu, giving the Conservative Party over £250,000, whether that plays a part into this. I mean, we need a proper procurement process.
You're talking about the former non-exec director for Fujitsu, Simon Blagden, who
Yes.
it's reported gave the Tory party £376,000 from him and firms associated with him since 2005, actually. Afterwards, he got a job in the DCMS advising on broadband.
Yeah, that's correct. So why isn't there a proper procurement process? How are these contracts just being handed to companies like Fujitsu?
What would you think, Bal, about either of Kate Osborne's suggestions, pausing for future contracts or stripping the current contracts away?
I think if everything's so embedded into the infrastructure of the country, I'm sure. I mean, I worked a little bit in a software house, and I know that bugs do occur when you do live updates, and and you do enhancements, you add bits on. I don't know how easy it would be to do that transformation, but certainly I think the main thing above everything is there's a human cost here, and ultimately there needs to be a mindset change generally. Like when these systems are designed or put in, it should be centered around the human, like education systems. How are they set up, and what is the flow of this?
Yeah.
And likewise for post office, for Horizon system, like the focus has to be from the postmaster outwards, not about the user friendliness, but about the consequence of what they do.
Okay.
So
we're out of time, Kate Osborne. I'm so sorry, but thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for your contributions, and good to see you again. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's it from us tonight. I'm back tomorrow. We will bring you reaction and analysis to that crunch vote on the Rwanda legislation. See you then.